Hello and welcome to The Sharpening. I am your host, Josh Peck. Well, we have a lot of exciting news for you tonight. First of all, tonight is episode 52 of The Sharpening, meaning this is our first year anniversary. For those of you who might be tuning in for the first time tonight and aren't familiar with the show, we have been a weekly show, some video, some just audio, covering a wide variety of topics, mostly with guests, occasionally with just me. We have never missed a single week, so it's been it's my pleasure to announce officially the beginning of year 2 of The Sharpening. The other bit of exciting news is our guest tonight and the format for these next few episodes. When I was thinking of how exactly to introduce our guest, one account from the Bible kept coming up again and again in my mind. The first mention we find of the prophet Elijah is in chapter 17 of 1 Kings. We read about the amazing man of God he was, but we also find out how very human he was as well. We read about the things he had completed for God throughout his life. In 1 Kings 19, we read how Elijah met his protege of sorts, Elisha. This was when Elisha asked to follow and minister to Elijah. Then we read in 2 Kings chapter 2 that Elijah was to be taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, leaving Elisha by himself. 2 Kings 2, 9 through 15 states, "And it came to pass that when they were gone over, that Elijah said unto Elisha, Ask what I shall do for thee before I be taken away from thee. And Elisha said, I pray thee, let a double portion of thy spirit be upon me. And he said, Thou hast asked a hard thing. Nevertheless, if thou shalt see me when I am taken from thee, it shall be so unto thee. But if not, it shall not be so. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that, behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. And Elisha saw it, and he cried, my father, the chariot of Israel and the horsemen thereof. And he saw him no more. And he took hold of his own clothes and rent them into 2 pieces. He took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and went back and stood by the bank of Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, and smote the waters, and said, Where is the Lord God of Elijah? And when he also had smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither, and Elisha went over. When the sons of the prophets which were to view at Jericho saw him, they said, The spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha. And they came to meet him, and bowed themselves to the ground before him. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the background of tonight's guest, Mark Flynn, you might be able to notice certain parallels in this biblical account to his story, as I do. For those who are not familiar, I'm sure elements of it will come up throughout the series. Mark Flynn, who is, in a sense, taking up the mantle of his late twin brother, David Flynn, has a new book, his first book, called Forbidden Secrets of the Labyrinth, The Awakened Ones, The Hidden Destiny of America, and The Day After Tomorrow. Now, let me tell you, in all honesty, I cannot think of a better way to kick off the second year of The Sharpening than with what Mark and I have planned. I've had the pleasure and honor of getting to know this individual for the past few weeks, and in my humble opinion, not only is he brilliant, but he also has an amazing heart for God and love for other people. His honesty, integrity, and humility are really a breath of fresh air in the world we live in, and I for one, am incredibly blessed to know him, let alone have him on the show. Mark and I have been planning on how exactly to go about this interview, and we've decided the best way is to do something never before done on The Sharpening. We're doing a series. What this means is for the next few weeks or so, we will be dedicating each episode to a specific portion of his book. Now, this is a very extensive book, and even with a series like this, there is no way that we're going to be able to hit all of the points made throughout. So I would highly suggest picking up the book yourself, and if you haven't already, and start following along. It's an excellent book, very well written. It's packed with information and guaranteed to shift your current paradigm concerning the world around you. I know it did for me. So, all of that being said, I would like to welcome to the show Mark Flynn. Mark, how are you doing?
Very good, Josh. Thanks for having me on. That was quite an introduction. I hope I can live up to it in this series. Wow.
Yeah, it was a little long-winded, but it's
No,
worth
not
it.
long-winded. The other part, yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But
Well, at
thanks a lot. I
least,
appreciate it.
oh yeah, I mean, I'm just saying stuff that, to me, getting to know you over the past few weeks, I've found to be true, and I'm not one to patronize anybody or say something nice about somebody that I don't believe is true. So those are things that I've learned about you, getting to know you, and I mean, it's been a blast.
Oh, yeah, no, it's been fun for me too. It's been really a good thing to be able to talk to you, and set up all our equipment and kind of get to know you too. Much more relaxing, let me tell you.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I have to give a big thanks to Paralendra Kilns from Watcher Vault for introducing us in the first place. I had heard of you beforehand from my friend Jim Wilhelmsen, but I I remember it's kind of funny when he first brought you up. This was a long time ago too. This was well before like your book came out, but he mentioned you, so I friend requested you on Facebook, and then I was kind of like I wanted to say hi, but I didn't want to. I don't know. I didn't want to like
That's
hi. I don't
Facebook.
really. Yeah,
All are welcome
exactly.
on Facebook.
You would think so, but you go. There's
Yeah,
always a few
at
that
least for
it's like,
me. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm like that too, and not knowing you at all and thinking, well, how. I remember being kids. It was so easy to make friends. You're in school with them. You have a reason for talking to them. When you're an adult, trying to make friends with another adult, it seems silly almost. Like there's no really good way of going about it. So me just being the kind of person I am, I fought with that for a few months, trying to figure
Well,
out if I should just say hi on face. Ridiculous as that is, that's how I handle myself. But I remember I was driving. I was driving with my wife, and Paralandra messaged me and said, "Oh, Mark Flynn's book is coming out." And the first thing that I asked was, "Does he have any plans for doing any shows? Because I'd love to have him on mine if he'd be willing to do that." And she's like, "Well, I will get a hold of him, mention you, and give him the website and everything." And
mhm.
then I got of course. Then I get impatient, and before she had a chance to write me back, like it was only maybe a couple hours later, I took it upon myself to message you on Facebook, and yeah, it wasn't. There was no issues. You wrote back, and it was very friendly, and as it turns out, a thing that I wasn't aware of, you had actually you were somewhat familiar with what I do and stuff, so that kind of helped break the ice.
Yeah, it was Paralander that introduced your work to me. So, yeah, no, I've been watching your shows. And yeah, the thing about Facebook, though, uh, you're so public on it, you have to decide to go all in or not. And I thought, maybe I should erase my Facebook presence because, well, I really know how out there you are once you're, doing things like that. But, you know, now that I've written a book, I'm opting to be more public, and so it's a sort of natural thing to do, I
Yeah, I
guess.
hear you.
So,
Yeah, I hear
yeah.
you. And it really is. It's all in or all out. Because I mean, I get a handful of friend requests every day, and I
Mhm.
don't have I don't have the time or energy to sort through each one and see if they're okay or not. I just add them all, and then if somebody turns out to be a weirdo or some lunatic, I'll have.
Well, I have some very select few friends that I look to see if they're friends with, and then so it's okay, they're a friend of them. So naturally, they're a friend of mine. And
Oh, there you go. That's a good way
Paralandra
to do
is
it.
one such person I use as that anchor.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, she's a very good judge of character. I'm glad to be
Yeah,
her
she
friend.
is. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she could be my friend filter, I think. She's
Yeah.
actually that. She doesn't know it. On Facebook, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I should mention
Yeah.
too for those who are watching this, the Sharpening, my show for the first time tonight. And I imagine that is probably the case for a few. The previous episodes we just did was actually with Paralandra. I pre-record all of my episodes, so these are kind of all over the place. At the time of the recording, I'm actually recording this first. I'm recording Paralandra's episode tomorrow, but by the time this is up, hers should be up if it's not done a little out of order. So, basic, short, long-winded thing by just saying, for those who are interested, check out. It would be the Sharpening. Let's see, what would that be? 50 and 51 Paralandra kilns, and even though I haven't recorded it yet at the time of this recording, I can say confidently that it's going to be a great show, and yeah, so check, for those watching who are interested, check it out. But anyway, getting back to you, I'm so glad that you took the time to do this, and that you actually, first time I've ever had a guest even offer this before. You took the time to actually work on this show with me on this episode, on this series. I thought that was really cool.
Well, thanks a lot for doing that with me. Kind of the reason I think that will work out better too is because my book has a lot of stuff in it that really needs to be discussed in a series fashion, so the audience has some kind of idea of what we're talking about. Because we have to really build into a couple things, which, as it turns out, I'm more excited about talking about. And the beginning things aren't as interesting to me. A lot of people probably have heard them, but I'll be putting them out nevertheless to see, just to get them out there for people.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Is it okay to mention what Paralandra has been doing as far as Watcher Vault? She is the person that put that all together. Very skilled. She's been keeping all that work together ever since my brother Dave passed away. And anyway, go out there. It's watchervault.com, and yeah, it's a very excellent site, the best out there on the internet. And there's a billion sites out on the internet, so.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I've even said that on on my Facebook wall from time to time, and it was kind of funny how her and I met, because I wasn't even aware. She found me and she offered to do a book review on my latest book, Quantum Creation, and I had been her friend on Facebook before that, but and we'd talk every now and then, but I didn't really know like who she was or what she did or anything. And when she offered to do a book review, I was like, oh, I didn't know that this person did book reviews. So I went and checked out the site, and I was like, oh, Dave Flynn stuff. I had no idea that she was involved with this kind of stuff. So through that, we got a lot closer and had a lot more interesting conversations. She wrote an excellent review for my book, Quantum Creation, and that, and of course, as I mentioned, she introduced you and I, which was really cool, because we were able to do what is sometimes called an author's trade. So neither of us had to pay for one another's books. You were kind enough to offer me a PDF of your book, and I gave you a PDF of mine, and so that was a lot of fun too.
Yeah, thanks for that, by the way. That was a good read.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime.
Yeah, it's been a long time since, boy, I think I was done writing this in January. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. Expecting it to be out last month, and came out this month, and I'm still seeing it on Amazon as out of stock. So I'm not really sure what that means, but soon it should be in stock. Someday.
Well, I'm sure. Yeah, if not Amazon, I'm sure there's other places that people will be able to pick up the book if they want. What Tom Horn's site? Is it Raiders News Update?
Yeah, Raiders News Update.
Yeah.
And I say that because I think it used to be a different ending, and I won't mention it because I don't want to confuse anybody or myself.
Yeah, I hear you. Completely understandable. Is your book available like directly on your website as well?
Not directly, but I have a link to Raiders News Update and to Amazon as well. So
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, that makes it easier too. MarkAFlynn.com. That's easy to remember.
yeah,
Good deal. Well, I guess the best way we could really kick this off, I'm sure quite a few have at least heard of you or have at least heard of your brother, but um, for those who may not be aware or actually haven't had the opportunity to hear your testimony yet, can I just ask for a, a rundown of your testimony, like how you came to know Jesus, how that led to what you're doing today, that sort of thing?
yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about that today. I think you'd mentioned something about, well, I hear you ask all your guests about their testimony. And, I can't remember a time that I didn't believe in God. And that being said, um, in my child mind, I was introduced to Catholicism probably in about grade 2. My parents decided to be Catholics. My dad always was a Catholic, and my mom was Lutheran, so they decided to be Catholics when we happened to move to Montana. And so I went to Catholic school on and off, and I learned Catholicism. And a strange sort of thing occurred to me today. One of the things I remember very well, there was a priest that I liked very, very much. He's a really nice guy. Um, Unlike a lot of the priests that people hear about, he was a great guy, very kind, very intelligent. And I remember him telling us one day that if we didn't go to Mass and we didn't go to enough confession, that we'd lose grace.
Oh, wow.
And, as a fourth grader, that didn't really make much sense to me. But as I got older, I thought about it over and over. And about the time high school came about, I rejected that type of concept completely. I was a Catholic when I was in grade school because that was what I was exposed to. But after that, um, I was a believer in God. I didn't really come to know Christ in my life until about my mid-20s. And I had a really good friend at a university I was going to. His name was Paul, and he acted every bit the biblical Paul. He was a philosophy student, and he knew each tree on campus kind of personally, and he'd write me long dissertations with Bible quotes in it. And anyway, I was talking with him and a bunch of other brothers in Christ, and we were just talking about the Word. And I was in a dorm room at the time, and I felt this incredible rushing sort of sensation. And there's no way to describe it other than I think I experienced the Ruach, the wind,
Oh,
the divine
wow.
wind, the Spirit. And ever since then, Christ has been real to me. And of course, I've had the influence of my twin brother. And how could a twin of a brother like Dave not be influenced by him? I'm sure you kind of know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I've experienced the Ruach, and a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. Speaking of that, it's going to be Rosh Hashanah here in what day is it? 2 days? 3 days?
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And where I work, fiscal New Year is coming up, but everybody's, oh, it's fiscal change of the year, they say, and I say, well, that's great. I guess a Rosh Hashanah is coming up, and they always look at me like, what? What are you talking about? So the part of the country that I live in is there's not a lot of people of the Jewish persuasion, but yeah, that's another sort of aspect of my growth. There is a complete lack of any education, at least in the Catholic schooling that I went through, of the Old Testament. I mean, there's a little bit that you'd hear in church, but no real discussion of it, and that would include when it was going on in the temple, and the meaning of what was going on in the temple, and many different things that they're not concerned with. They're of course concerned with Catholic. I don't want to say dogma, but it is dogma. But
Yeah.
Uh,
I can definitely
my brother
relate.
would say, I don't. My brother would always say, I don't want to offend Catholics, or I don't want to offend Masons, and I'd always think, it just gets too difficult. I'm sorry if you're offended. I'm not going to be offensive, but I'm going to say it like it is.
Oh,
I guess.
yeah, yeah. I can
Yeah.
so relate to that because anybody who is familiar with the show or familiar with my testimony, I was raised really traditional Baptist, and it was kind of the same thing with the Old Testament. There was no real education or discussion about it. I did, the only thing I heard about like the temple ever was, well, don't get piercings or tattoos because your body is a temple. I had no idea what that meant. Like that was never really explained. Like, well, what is a temple? What is a temple for what? What does that mean?
It would help, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Short little instruction. Oh, and that reminds me, another thing that used to always occur to me when I was little, the priests would always talk about the great feast that we were experiencing when we were having the mass, and I'd always think, well, then I don't see any food, and I'm hungry. They're up there drinking wine and having their bread, and I'm not getting anything to eat. But sorry. Feast.
Yeah, yeah.
In Judaism, they actually have real feasts, and they're part of the ritual that have the rituals that have meaning, you know, very profound meaning, very important meaning, unlike you know other religions that I've been exposed to. But go ahead.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah,
Sorry to
absolutely.
interrupt you.
No. Oh, you're fine. Yeah, like I was yeah, with the whole Baptist thing, there was a lot of that kind of stuff, and it was just crazy because it's not even the first half of the Bible. It's way more than half. And it's like,
Yeah,
well, let's take like the last quarter of it and the end of the book, and we'll create all of our beliefs on that.
right.
And we don't need foundation or anything that the Old Testament provides. We'll just skip to the end, figure out, cobble together what we can, and put some stuff together. And if
Mhm.
anybody asks, we'll just tell them, well, you got to take it on faith. And then if they don't, then we'll tell them that they're not being Christian enough or something.
Yeah, there's nothing that says if you're Christian, you just have to shut off your ability to reason. A
Yeah.
lot of people somehow get that mixed up. Well, if you're not believing exactly what the minister or the pastor's saying, then we have a problem with you. That's not how he interprets it. It should be completely the opposite.
Yeah.
Read and don't just read the King James version. I hear people talk to me. So what version or what translation do you read? And King James, and well, yes, but I go further than that if if I can,
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
Greek or in the Old Testament Hebrew because I can, because it's free. It's out there on the internet. Just go to Blue Letter Bible and you can get someone to actually pronounce the Hebrew words for you by pressing a button. Of course, you need a speaker with
Yeah.
a computer with a speaker.
I think that's so cool. Like in it, unfortunately, I think a lot in our day and age that the amazing technology that we have available to us that we can learn these things, it's kind of squandered. There's not, people are, I guess, interested in what the Kardashians are doing or something. When you look at the world's
Right.
population as a whole, uh, how many are really using the internet for education and learning? And I mean, and that even goes outside of just college and school, because a lot of people take online courses, and that that's great.
Mm-hmm.
But even in just like the church nowadays, sometimes people like you and I are referred to as armchair theologians because we don't have the appropriate academic credentials to be able to speak on the things that we speak about. But
Yes,
with
you used a special word, academic. We'll be talking
yeah,
about academic here pretty soon. Well, quite a while from now, perhaps. But yeah, yeah, it's all out there, and from my perspective, though, the internet wasn't available till I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and people, it's a natural thing now, but it was spectacular and just so exciting, when it first came out. And now it's even more spectacular and exciting. There's so much free information out there. There's almost too much for people to assimilate, even if they do spend a lot of time. I think you need a kind of a background to filter all the information that is available out there in a way that you can start making sense of it. And that kind of, and I'm probably interrupting you again.
But, no, you're fine. You're fine. Go for it.
That's kind of the reason why. It's kind of the reason, or sort of the point that I decided to write this book, because the information is out there, and I can gather it, I can do it, everybody else can do it and verify what I've seen. Almost everything in the book is open source stuff, or what am I thinking of? Non-copyrighted material, over 100 years or 70 years old, or and translated into English online. You can search in English for special words, and you can kind of step back and see a bigger picture. And I think if I can do that for people, if I can set that framework in front of them, so that they at least can understand the framework and start critically thinking using that framework, I think that they can probably get the big picture like I see it as well, or I'm trying to display it in the book. That's another reason I think it needed to be a book too. I didn't want to put it out in a blog, sort of piecemeal. Even I didn't want to write it and put it out in a PDF file either. I don't think as many people would see it, and a web page really wouldn't work. It's just about getting people to. In a book, you have to read the first page, really. You feel kind of like you're cheating yourself if you just skip it across. On a web page, it just sort of happens. You don't know where you are or where you're going a lot of the time, unless it's really made well. So, and I think I've achieved that in this book. I think people will read it and understand where I'm going. And as they get towards the later chapters, I think they'll be able to have the whole kind of idea coalesce, understand what I'm trying to talk about without having to think about, or don't have to memorize. They won't have to memorize what I'm talking about. They'll just sort of understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's been my experience with it, and that's what I love about this book is it really does follow a certain path, and each point you make builds off of the last, and it is really it's easy to follow, and it's easy to understand where you're coming from and what you're trying to say and why. And I love books like that. And the other thing too about this book is that it is so packed with information. It's a book that you can read. I'm on my with parts of it, I'm on my third time reading it. Other parts, I'm on my second time reading it. But it's one of those books. Yeah, you can read it like over and over again and still pick up stuff because just the vast wealth of information. But yeah, so I can definitely attest to that. That's at least been my like what you described. That's been my experience in reading it. But yeah, it's such a good book. But it was interesting what you were saying before about how things are available now, and I think a lot of times in our culture that we take when I say education, I don't necessarily mean like the college experience, just general things that we can learn, like say on the internet or that's free. I think we take a lot of that for granted. I'm not any better at it than anybody else. I spend most of my time on Facebook and email and stuff when I could be, trying to educate myself. So I'm no better at it either. But I think it's so interesting to think about how we look at education now as opposed to how like the ancients looked at education, or even back in say like the Middle Ages. And something that you bring up in your book is the study of mythology in the during the Middle Ages, and we could even talk about that. What were the requirements needed before the study of mythology during the Middle Ages?
Well, I was thinking about what the real two things would be, and that would be your family needed money first off, so they had to be part of the group of people that had the information. They also needed, access to a library that had the books, so the students could read them, and then they needed the teachers that were able and willing to teach. And it naturally, at that time, required language skills in Greek, Hebrew, Latin, of course, and the student would have to go through a cycle of learning rather than just having it all thrown to them at one time. What was it? The first thing that they needed was grammar, and then logic and rhetoric, and then they moved on after they'd mastered those to the quadrivium, which were the 4 subjects: arithmetic, astronomy, very important, geometry, just as important, and music, which a lot of people don't realize. Music isn't really taught that much here in the United States. It used to be a little bit more, but in other countries like Japan, they teach every student how to read music. It's just something that kids learn to do. So once the quadrivium, the 4 subjects are mastered, then only if the student is deemed worthy, then he'll get a mentor and he'll move on to mythology. And how long that takes, I think, would vary. It depends on the student, and then depends on, of course, I think if the student's very worthy, then they'll get a mentor regardless of whether their family has the money to do it. But a worthy student requires a worthy mentor, and from then on, the study of mythology brings them somewhere. There's a goal of mythology, or understanding mythology, and a lot of people don't realize that there is. Freemasons, I think, definitely understand what the goal is, and I think there's another genre of people who have the knowledge that maybe wouldn't consider themselves Freemasons, but I would call them the neo-alchemists. And they keep this body of knowledge and give it to, or I guess it's more of a dissemination of it, tests for people to see if they're worthy.
So why is the the study of mythology, why is it so important to people like that? Like what was the ultimate goal of the study of mythology?
The ultimate goal would be to get to the sun, and if anybody said that really well, it was Plato in his Republic, and he talks about the cave of the philosophers, which before I try to explain it and do a very bad job at it, I have it on my blog, and it's a cartoon version with Orson Welles narrating the whole thing. It actually is a really excellent way to go and figure out what it's all about. I guess, of course, you could read the Republic, but a lot of people don't have that patience. I know Paralander probably did.
Yeah.
Most likely did. But yeah, and when I say find the sun, I'm talking about intellectual illumination.
Oh,
And when
okay.
I talk about intellectual illumination, what I'm talking about is knowledge, specifically that was given to mankind in the Garden of Eden. And I don't know if a lot of people make that connection. So when you're learning mythology in high school, or just sort of a cursory survey or whatever it is, and you learn about Narcissus, for example, right? You learn that this guy really liked the way he looked, and you learn that story. You learn about Arachnid, the weaver, and the contest, and how Arachnid was punished. Or, there's a lot of stories, but you just learn the stories. You don't understand what the stories mean, and the stories are almost always, every time I've looked at them with some consideration, always talking about something else. and that's something else I think I'll work in, we'll work into talking about. But it's I don't really want to use the word diabolical, but it's, I guess, more simple to just say it's about illumination. It's about opening of the eyes of man. Exactly what happened to Eve when she ate the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. Her eyes were opened. And, by the way, that's what Europa means. So everybody who is living in Europe, maybe their eyes are open more than ours, I don't know, but Europa.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
um, Oh, yeah, as it turns out in the story of the cave, it's a dialogue between Socrates and a student of his named Glaucon, and that also means, it's also an idea of open eyes or wide shining eyes, like Athena has. Always the bright, the eyes it can see. The owl can see. It has the big eyes. You see owls all over the place in architecture. But yeah, are you familiar with the allegory of the cave, or the cave of the
Yeah,
philosophers?
I watched the video on your website, and yeah,
Hmm.
it was very well done. And what? Yeah, I mean, like what exactly is that? Is that trying to show in reference to this idea of being enlightened and everything? And as I understand it too, you have uh, something in your book where I might be jumping ahead a little bit, but that you show this idea of the divided line that represents the allegory of the cave. So for those who may not be familiar with it, uh, what, like a basic rundown? What's the allegory of the cave, and what's the deal with the divided line?
Um, what Plato's talking about is the state of mankind who lives in this darkness and yet thinks that they understand the world, and so that's why he calls it the cave of the philosophers. Um, what it what the story is, exactly is, he says, well, what if men were born in darkness in a cave and chained to a wall, even their heads being chained, and all they could see in front of them was another wall and somewhere behind them, but they didn't understand that there was anything behind them at all. There were shadows being projected on the wall that they could see. And what is, what type of thought would go on amongst the people that were wise or capable of thinking? Well, there would be philosophers among them that saw the shapes on the walls moving, and they would say, well, I can predict what that shape will do. And that was the extent of what they knew. And he talks about, well, what if you released one of these men and actually let them come out of that portion of the cave and see that there was a fire above them and there were people walking above them on a wall casting these shadows? How would he react? Now he's made that first step, away from ignorance, and it's difficult for him. The light's bright, and what he sees is very strange. He's never seen it before. He's talking about it being difficult for us to step away from our ignorance and go towards the true light, which happens to be a bit more diabolical than people would realize. They don't realize. I mean, what he's talking about is something that I find very diabolical, but you'll see what I'm saying. Anyway, he says, continue on. Let's say that there's a path towards the outside from this cave, and the sun's out. What if a man went all the way outside and saw the sun? He'd be absolutely blinded. He's never seen anything so bright in his life. But eventually his eyes would become accustomed to the light, and he'd start seeing the whole world out there. And he'd be, of course, naturally very excited and want to go tell his friends, his brother philosophers still in the cave. And that's a problem. Once you see and once you know, what's out there, what the light, what the true world, where the true information and knowledge comes from, the source of it. You go back and try to explain it to people that are chained in ignorance still. They will not accept it, and it's a labor to take them out and get them to see what you see. There's almost no way that you can ever explain to them what the sun is. You can't explain to someone that's been chained in a cave their whole life, looking at the wall at shadows. Anyway, he has another allegory that he extends from the cave, the allegory of the cave, to the allegory of the divided line. And specifically, he talks about a line that's been divided as the golden ratio. And I don't know if I should get into the golden ratio right now, but the first section, he says, is the unseen world, which is the larger section of it. It's the world outside, and then the visible world is the smaller section, the shadows on the wall. And it progresses from images to objects and belief in the objects, and then into intelligent understanding, and then to the true world and the sun. But there's another layer to this idea of the divided line, or the allegory of the divided line, and that is the golden mean, the golden section. And it's really a really important key that I found that brings a lot of the meaning out of these mythological accounts and these stories. And you see the ancient philosophers talking about mathematical constants like phi, which is the golden mean, or pi. What is phi? It's 1.618. And the way you can calculate the golden mean is by doing a number series. And the Italian mathematician, I think his name was, what was his name? You can interrupt me at any time. Fibonacci? I don't know why I forgot that Fibonacci sequence.
Oh, I'm looking at your notes, and it says Fibonacci, the Fibonacci sequence.
Yes, the Fibonacci sequence. So, yeah, you start the Fibonacci sequence with 0, 0, then add the next number, 1, and you get 1, then add that number to what the result is. So 1 plus 1 is 2, you get a 2, then 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8. It goes on and on and on like that infinitely. And as it turns out, the farther down the series, if you take the two resulting numbers and divide the lower one into the next higher one, you'll get that ratio, 1.6, fairly close, 1.61803, I think. There is another way to find out what that number is, and that is by making a golden right triangle, or using the right triangle to make a golden section. And I won't go into that, but I think the easiest thing to say about golden triangles is if you look at a regular pentagram, there are 5 golden triangles, and that's just the definition of a regular pentagram. It has 5 golden triangles.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
The reason that a golden triangle is important, and the golden ratio is important, is because of an idea. And maybe I shouldn't get into the idea right now, but it's very important in the sense of generating something new, something that hasn't existed before, but with the quality that the thing that generates itself. And there's a word for it, and I'll start talking about that a little bit later.
Sure.
But getting back to the triangles, if you take 2 of these right triangles and put them together, you'll I automatically I start thinking of Greek architecture, and you'll see pillars, and you'll see the triangular, sort of attic above it all the time. You'll see them in government buildings. You'll definitely see them in banks. You'll see them outside of very rich people's houses. I mean, the more ornate, the better. And I'd seen them everywhere, and wondered about them. And when I wonder about something for a long time, it starts getting irritating to me. And I think there's got to be a reason why I'm seeing them everywhere and seeing them, over and over in certain places. Characteristically, you'll see them in government buildings all the time, almost exclusively. No good, expensive government building is ever put together without some type of Greek architecture. And that style, or the neoclassical or Palladian style, is something that you'll see in Washington, D.C., definitely. And they are definitely telling a story. When you go there, you know what I mean. If you've already been there, I'm sure you know what I mean. But they're not only telling a story, they're doing magic. And it sounds maybe a bit crazy. They're doing ritual. They're doing ritual for favor of the god that they worship. So I might as well backtrack a little bit from here and go back to the Garden of Eden, which I really haven't addressed. And what I'm talking about is when the Nakash, and since I speak English, if I want to use a K for the ha sound, Nakash,
Trust me,
I think I'll just do it.
That's totally fine. Anybody that is a regular viewer or listener of this show, they have to hear me try to pronounce Hebrew words and Greek words, and I always butcher them. So so it's no problem at all. People, people will bear with us.
So when that angel goes to the garden that God made, the paradise that he made, where he made Adam and Eve, and his presence was with them, and told Eve that God had lied to her, that her eyes would be opened and she would be like God, be as a God herself. And when she ate that fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good, the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, her eyes were opened, as it says in Genesis, and she became naked. Well, she realized she was naked, but in the Hebrew, it means subtle. She became subtle, and I won't say the word because I'll probably butcher it too. But according to the people that I'm talking, I might as well just say who these people. They're the upper echelons of Freemasonry, and of course, they will deny it. It seems really kind of like a cliche thing to say. Well, the Freemasons worship Lucifer. No, not all of them. I would say that the people that are like lower level Masons may not realize that there are a group that's much higher than them of a different sort of mindset, but they definitely worship Lucifer. They worship the Nakash, and they also worship the first human being that did what the Nahash told her to do. And they have an opposite, or a completely 180 degree version of the story in Genesis. And that was, and Bill Cooper, who wrote Behold a Pale Horse, said the same thing that I'm saying. That is, they believe that mankind was the prisoner of God there, and God made us as an oppressor, evil God. And I think you talked a little bit about this in your last book, in Gnosticism, which I found really, Sophia, very, very fascinating. Anyway, and then Nahash went to the garden to free man. If it wasn't for the Nahash going to the garden and giving Eve the fruit, we would have had no chance at all. We'd still be prisoners there. So Eve is worshipped as well, or she's venerated, honored, as a creature that generated a new version of humanity. She did the act by listening to what the serpent told her to do against what her creator God told her that would kill her, cause her to die. She did something that made a completely new creature knowing good and evil. And then, of course, the effects of this were that heaven, I'd say paradise was broken, or heaven, God's presence on earth, left. He left and cursed the snake and cursed both Adam and Eve. And they had to labor to live, and they did die. They didn't know what death was before that. They found out. But the people that worship the Nahash definitely think Eve was a great being, and they, in their minds, she is a goddess, and she is the first human being to have the knowledge that the snake, the Nahash, gave mankind. What portion of knowledge that is they think quite large. But this idea of self-generation has a word, and if you look into the Greek pantheon and you see Athena, she has her Parthenon. I almost said pantheon, I meant Parthenon, and Parthenos means self-generation or virgin, the self-born virgin. The temple of the self-born virgin is the Parthenon. And the story about Athena is that she sprung in full armor out of the head of Zeus after Prometheus, the god that stole fire, light, knowledge from Zeus. He struck Zeus in the head with a double-bladed axe, or a labrie, which released Athena with her bright eyes. And this is an allegory of the story in the Garden of Eden. The serpent is Prometheus, and the double-bladed axe is, the two-sided thing, the knowledge of good and evil, the fruit. And he struck at God himself, right? His creator, he struck at him, this is what I'm doing to what you've set up. I'm splitting you away from the earth, and I'm giving this woman knowledge that I'm going to control for the time being, and your presence is going to leave, and heaven's going to leave earth. So I've said enough about the garden now, but going back to architecture, pillars are a symbol of that act in the garden, that occurrence in the garden where heaven got separated from the earth because of what the Nahash did. And that idea of having the golden sections above are talking about parthenogenesis. And I am not explaining the relation very well now, but the thing about parthenogenesis is there's creatures on Earth that actually do exhibit this trait, like bees, and some reptiles do. And I think the turkey does, and occasionally the chicken can have offspring without having a male around at all, with no fertilization, like they can have offspring. But in fact, the genealogy of the queen is the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah, I thought that was so cool when I read that, and because I had no idea that type of thing even showed up in biological nature. I've heard of things like the golden mean and the golden ratio showing up in certain things like in seashells or even star clusters and things like that. But when it comes to the Fibonacci sequence, I had no idea that actually does show up in biological genealogies. And you use the example of bees in your book to show that. and which actually you dedicate a whole chapter that's just called bees, and I thought
Yeah.
that was there's so much interesting stuff with that. It's amazing.
Yeah, the bees were incredibly important in the ancient world, especially in ancient goddess worship. A lot of the priestesses to Artemis and Athena were called bee mistresses. People talk about it, but I don't. I've never gone anywhere out on the internet and read or seen in literature exactly why. Why are they
Yeah,
called bee mistresses? What's the point? There's got to be a reason for it, and I believe I'm quite convinced that it's the idea of self-generation. That idea of the occurrence. I mean, they're always related to the goddesses, the female gods, not the male as much, but they're all Eve goddess like in the way that they are affiliated with these parthenogenic creatures. The yeah, the queen can make a drone, but you need a drone and a queen to make another queen. So that's how
wow.
that genealogy goes. And so anyway, I was talking about Athena
Yeah,
and
yeah. There,
her her
you
Parthenon. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, you make an interesting point in your book with Athena and the Egyptian equivalent of that.
Yeah, I was going to say that there is her Parthenon is aligned, and I don't know if a lot of people know this. It's aligned to a specific star cluster in the night sky,
Oh,
and
wow.
that is in Taurus. And the star cluster's name is Hyades. And the mythology behind that is Hyades were the daughters of the personification of the pillars Atlas himself, the one who stands on the edge of the world on the earth and holds heaven. A lot of people are confused about what Atlas does. He holds the earth, he stands on the earth, and he keeps heaven and earth apart. But I won't go into the story about that. It's in Hesiod's Theogony, Origin of the Gods. But that's an interesting thing. I mean, why would her temple be aligned to that specific star cluster in Taurus? And why Taurus? Um, I'll get into that. That is a major portion of the book. Um, what's what's the bull worship all about? Why is there such a seeming there's a fixation on the bull in ancient mythology? Zeus always turned into a bull. Why was that? Anyway, I'll get back to Athena and Neth. the Athena has an equivalent in Egyptian mythology named Neth. Peculiar thing about Neth was that she wore a red headdress called a deshret, and it had a peculiar sort of appendage coming out of the center, which everybody describes as a bee proboscis. And it was red. The hat was red, and it symbolized her dominion over the red lands, the deshret, the bright lands, and the counterpart to Neth was Set, and he ruled over the Kemet, or the dark lands. And then here again, you have this allegory of light and dark. You have the Kemet, which is the land, the fertile earth lands near the Nile, and you have this dark lord Set ruling over it. Not necessarily dark; it's the earth. But then you have the red lands where the sun comes and where the woman reigns, and she is somehow has something to do with bees. She's sending the light, as Neth was said to do, send rays into the primordial ocean to spark life. And the idea is this light and dark coming together, this woman and darkness coming together again, becoming one. Neth specifically was a goddess of war, like Athena, hunting, weaving. Her symbol was the crossed arrows, and the loom, and she usually is depicted holding an ox goad, the type of thing, a very long staff that you use to try to get your oxen to move. Another parallel between Neth and Athena was this protection that they had called the Aegis, spelled in it's the Greek, but in English it's spelled Aegis, but I think it's pronounced Aegis. And the peculiar thing about the Aegis that Athena wore is it came from a snake. In some cases, it's a snake. In others, it's a goat or a goat-like creature. And the name of it was Pallas, P-A-L-L-A-S, Pallas. And Pallas has a lot of different identities in mythology, and how actually Athena came to wear that skin around her neck, or that shield that was made out of the skin of Pallas around her neck. But in one account, it was the Titan Pallas, the giant serpent. In other cases, Pallas was her teacher or her colleague or her friend. But in every case, Athena accidentally killed Pallas, and it's consistent usually that there was something that Zeus did to interfere with them fighting, and so Pallas was injured, and Athena took advantage of the momentary lapse of protection because of what Zeus did to Pallas, and accidentally killed her friend or teacher, and she was very remorseful. And it sounds kind of like a very strange thing if you're remorseful and sad about what you did to your great friend, that you'd skin your friend, but that's that's where the Aegis came from, and it's a symbol that she wears, showing that she is the greatest of all warriors. She's invulnerable. When she's wearing this Aegis, there's nothing that can beat her, nothing can defeat Athena. She's the goddess of war, and there are likenesses of Neth that wear the same sort of Aegis-looking garment. It looks like an armored apron that they wear. And a peculiarity of Athena's Aegis is that she has the face of Medusa on the front.
Oh, wow.
And I don't get into that story, but it's in the book, and it kind of reinforces the idea of what Zeus represents and what the bull or the ox represents as well. But go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, it's so interesting how all of those things, connect and represent different things, and you've done such a fantastic job laying that out throughout your book.
You're too kind.
We'll
see. I think you're one of maybe 10 people that have read it so far.
well, everybody is missing out, because I don't say that stuff like flippantly or anything like that. When I say something about somebody's book, I'm sincere and genuine about it. But I mean, I've always been interested in Greek mythology even since I was a kid, and I've never really looked at it from the perspective of these things might actually represent things that we believe in, but a twisted view of it, like you had mentioned and made the example of the Garden of Eden, and how the enlightened ones might look at the story from a completely different angle.
Right.
And that was something that came up in my research with the whole Gnostic thing that you brought up too. But I've never made that connection with Greek mythology. I think that's so cool.
Yeah, the thing that strikes me is, as far as the Gnostics and the neo-alchemists and the upper levels of the Freemasons are concerned, they absolutely believe in the Garden of Eden event. Whereas I think there's perhaps some Christians is to say, maybe the Christians is to say, maybe that's an allegory, or it's just a nice story, or don't, they don't take the Bible really literally. Um, Actually, there's a lot of Christians that are very ignorant of a lot of the things in the Bible, but or just pick which ones that they like. But that Garden of Eden story is everything
Yeah.
to the mystics. It is absolutely the beginning of everything, and it's so absolutely important. I'm definitely convinced of that. Um, say for the understanding of it is completely reversed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, when it's interesting because when you think about it, it's like, okay, if Lucifer or Satan or what have you were to tell this story, how would he tell it? And that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Man, yeah,
Yeah, the walled garden of our prison. He got in and saved us, but for his great act, he was punished by God. Right? He was
mhm.
made to crawl on his belly and eat dust, and that is the beginning of a circuit. Um, and I'm not really sure why I was thinking that now. That's 3:14 in Genesis 3:14.
Yep.
3.141 reminds me of another mathematical constant, and I think it's appropriate that it is that chapter and verse because it is the beginning of an idea of a circuit, because you have this paradise, you have an incursion of this angel that destroys it, and God, at that point in time, he punishes the serpent, and he also makes a prophecy. If you're looking at Genesis that way, I think I read a book by DeHaan, Portraits of Christ in Genesis, where he talks about um, that specific verse where he is guaranteeing a redeemer from man that will strike at the heel of the snake, or the snake would strike at man's heel, but the man would crush his head rather. And that's something that's being inverted when you're looking at the pediment. And I don't know if I talked about that, but the pediment is what that triangular shaped roof structure is on top of the pillars.
Oh,
So
okay. Yeah.
pediment's at the top, even though it means foot. And so you have this idea of a reversal that Nakesh is saying, and I didn't complete that thought. Now, come to think of it, the Nakesh is saying, I'm going to reverse the curse that you gave me, God, and I'm going to reunite heaven and earth under my plan, my will, and because I gave mankind the fruit that you told them to kill them, that act is what I'm going to use to make the world, my own. I'm going to bring it together under my will rather than your will. His defiance is displayed in every building you look at that has that structure, the pillars. You can think of it, well, this was set there because of the act in the garden. These pillars are now separating heaven and earth, and that defiant structure at the top is the Nakesh saying, I still am defying you, God, and through the doors of whatever building that is, whatever that institution is, what's going on there somehow furthers that plan towards the ultimate end. Of course, we know who wins,
Right.
but I'm talking through, the mindset of the people that worship the serpent. They don't.
Yeah, that's
I'm sure they don't understand what they're looking at, or why they even. Well, maybe I'm wrong about that, but the majority of people who go into buildings like that and work or are part of these organizations have no idea what it means when they look at it. And
yeah, it's so fascinating, and I've often wondered about that too. Like, what is it about Greek architecture that it's everywhere, and you see that in all of those buildings, and what you just said about it going into that building and whatever purpose that that is, or government kind of thing that is, it's to further that end, and that's kind of like the signpost of that with the pillars and the pediment. That is so fascinating because that's one of the things that when I read your book, it was like, wow, I cannot think of a building that is constructed in that way that doesn't further Satan's end in some way or another.
Banks, yeah, no doubt banks would have them. You see them, of course, almost every capital, every county building, every courthouse. Courthouses love them. Love that type of architecture, and Masonic temples really like
Yeah.
neoclassical. But I think they definitely understand why they're putting it there. If you go into it, I've never been into a Masonic temple before. I've never walked, never set foot into one, but I've seen lots of pictures on the internet.
Yeah, there's actually, strangely enough, there's actually one like right by my apartment building.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've never gone in.
I go with my camera to a lot of the older cities in Montana as I am playing around in the summer on my motorcycle or whatever it is, and I definitely take pictures and visit everyone I can find. The older ones are great. They had a lot of money. The turn of the last century, they made some really great temples. Anyway, so we're talking about Neth and the idea of joining heaven and earth again under their power, and the fact she wears an aegis like Athena. It's important to realize kind of that there's more goddesses in the ancient world that all have similar characteristics. In fact, when I was looking at all of them in depth, I found that you can make a graph and you can find various citations from ancient authors that say, well, this goddess is really this one in this culture, like what's a good example? Well, I mean, what we just been talking about, they say the counterpart of the Egyptian Neth is Athena. But Athena is also related to goddesses much, much older, an Anatolian goddess. And I say Anatolian, and people don't know what I mean. Anatolia just is modern day Turkey, that area.
Oh, okay.
Turkey, that large landmass. And there's an ancient goddess, or the mother, they called the great mother goddess, that was adopted by Greece and later Rome, but it's very old, and her name was Cybele. And for a long time I wondered how her name was pronounced, and it's Cybele, and she has a very strange story. She wasn't always a female goddess. She was a male goddess. She started out as Aegisthus, and the story about Aegisthus is that there were other great gods that were jealous of his power. So they attacked him and emasculated him. And from that point on, he became Cybele. And she's important because she is the goddess of Mount Ida. Now, a lot of people are kind of confused about where Mount Ida is. There's two of them in mythology. The ones I'm talking about, I'm not talking about the one in Crete that's related to the Minoans. I won't talk about the Minoans at all. I'll just talk about the Trojans, and I'll talk about Mount Ida. And Mount Ida is the origin of the Trojans. At least that's what their legends say. And Mount Ida was the mountain of Cybele. And she was responsible for the establishment of the city of Troy, but rather it's always said that Athena was responsible for it. Going back to the killing of Pallas, Athena also made a statue that is called the Palladium, in
Oh, okay.
the likeness of Pallas, and it looks like Athena standing on a pedestal holding a spear. So that's where the story of Pallas being her friend or her teacher, someone that looked like her instead of the snake. But the idea of the Jesus being this protecting shield and being made of snakeskin or goat skin is really curious, because you have this same idea, this other idea of Pan being related to the Nakash as well. So you have the snake and you have the goat being both of what the Aegis is supposed to be made up of. So anyway, going back to the Anatolia and Cybele, Anatolia means where the sun rises. I thought that was interesting because Japan's named basically the same thing, the source of the sun.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
The source of the sun, or the east, or the sun comes from the east. And so the people from Anatolia were the source of the light, of the knowledge. And they worship that goddess. And I talked about a place called Göbekli Tepe, and that's the fairly recently found archaeological site that's over 10,000 years old, and just proving that there was some very ancient civilization in that area. But they all had a common mother goddess that they worshipped. And you'll find there, and the Greeks imitated what they found, miniature shrines to Cybele. And they're called in Greek naiskos. I don't know if you've ever seen one, but people will have in their houses, or they used to in like Pompeii, naiskos, little miniature shrines, and there'd always be a snake somewhere on it, and there'd be Cybele or some other Cybele-like goddess. And I put Cybele at the base as a tree of where the goddesses come from. She is at the base, and it's Athena and Hera and Aphrodite spring kind of from her, and it's more equivalent with Neth and Cybele. I believe Cybele was before Neth, but I'm not a historian or an archaeologist. I'm just an engineer. But going towards the point that I'm trying to make is, I'm just a guy who went on the internet and gathered information and started to see a pattern and started to write about. And anyone else can do this. And I'm hoping people will, so. But anyway, the Naiskos, you can still see a lot of people. I think they're in a lot of museums in Greece specifically, and also Rome made a lot of them. But getting away from this goddess, I'll go back to her, especially when I'm talking about the cult of Mithra. that's a long way from now, I think. But
well, it never hurts to allude.
Yeah, at the point when Aegisthus became Cybele, the blood from the injury caused an almond tree to grow. Almonds, very interesting, because there's symbolic ideas about almonds in a lot of the architecture in Washington, D.C. specifically. But the river goddess, I think it was Nana, picked an almond from the tree that grew, and she put it in her, what's the story? She put the almond in her bosom, and then Attis was born, and Attis is the son of Cybele. And so he comes into the story fairly early, and kind of understanding the story of Attis and Cybele, and I don't mean kinda, I think thoroughly understanding the story is very important, especially if you're going to understand what the Masons are doing with a lot of the symbolism and the worship they go through, and I say worship, or the ritual that they go through. And anyway, Attis was a very peculiar son. He grew up and his mother Cybele loved him very much, and they became lovers. And he's known for his great beauty and his peculiar dress. He wore, for all intents and purposes, was a stylized deshret
Oh, okay.
hat, and the people of Anatolia used to be recognized by this peculiar sort of red hats, floppy red hats that they'd wear, which are called the Phrygian cap, the Phrygian caps. And you'll see them a lot on a lot of statues of Athena, and Neth is always wearing one. Attis always wears one, and Sibley sometimes wears them. A lot of other goddesses wear them. I think people don't realize what they are because these ancient statues, art pieces always are not colored anymore. But what this Phrygian cap is this stylized deshret, or this allusion to the bee again. And they're always red, though. And in history, they're always described as red hats, the Phrygian caps. But so he wears that all the time. And the story of Attis goes, it's kind of bizarre. It's you're talking about a god and a goddess. I'm saying Attis is a god. He wasn't necessarily a god. He was sort of a demigod. But Cybele was a goddess, and they're Anatolian gods, or Proto-Greek. And then the story is that Zeus was having a wedding, and a wedding for Attis, and Attis was going to marry. And right now, I'm drawing a blank who he's going to marry. Oh no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Zeus. It was King Midas. I have to start over again. No, Attis was preparing to marry the daughter of King Midas, and so Cybele was so jealous because beforehand, of course, they were mother-son, but they were also lovers. And she was so jealous, she came into the wedding ceremony and caused everybody to go ravingly mad. And Attis emasculated himself
Oh,
in
wow.
this raving madness. And an excellent account of this portion of mythology is in a book by Sir James George Fraser called The Golden Bough. And I wasn't really familiar with it when before I started my research, but it used to be very popular, I think, in the 1920s. But I definitely recommend that. And that leads me to remember that, yeah, I think it's already over, but I think maybe it won't be over. I don't know. Tom Horn had put that compilation of all those books out online.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You ordered along with mine, and it would have been really great to, to get a hold of that because the Golden Bough happens to be included in that, so.
Oh, cool.
Anyway, so he Attis castrated himself and died from loss of blood. And Cybele was so remorseful, she asked Zeus to resurrect him, and Zeus refused. And he said, I'm not going to do that, but I'll go halfway, and I'll make him immortal, but he'll be a pine tree now. He'll be in the form of a pine tree, always living, and yet not quite alive. So maybe there's hope for this Attis who died in this act of madness. And it's sort of an ambiguous thing. Why did he go mad? Why did everybody go mad, lose their minds when Cybele came? And I think the answer to that will be more clear towards the end of the book, what this madness is about. And I'm going off sort of on a tangent here, but
Oh, that's
a
totally
lot
fine.
of what I guess I'm getting you ready for me to go off on a tangent here. A lot of the stuff I talk about, and I think people will see after reading the book and listening maybe to our discussions, they'll start seeing a lot of what Stanley Kubrick's trying to represent. There's a sort of ongoing joke between him and his colleagues. They'd say, "Are you still fooling him, Stanley?" And he'd say, "Yeah." A lot of people, I've seen many different interpretations of a lot of his work out there, but what I see, I haven't seen anybody to this date explain it. And I will be explaining it here pretty soon. I'm going to be doing a very, I hope, very thorough series on The Shining. I was thinking I was going to do A Clockwork Orange first. No, I'm going to do The Shining first because that's what most people in the United States have seen, and it's not like a formerly rated X movie. I guess that, yeah, some of them, yeah. Clockwork Orange came out, it was rated X for a while, and Eyes Wide Shut, I don't know, it should be rated X if it isn't, but yeah, The Shining
Right.
is a better one, and I have a special place in my heart for it because the opening scene is in going to the Sun Highway at Glacier Park in Montana. So.
Right. Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that was something that you mentioned on the phone when one of the times that we spoke, and you mentioned that you had some interesting interpretations about Stanley Kubrick's work, and is it when you say that you're going to have a series, are you like writing a blog about it, or is it going to be like how's that going to be portrayed? And is it too early to ask for a little teaser on that?
I'm planning. Well, I have it mostly written right now. I'm going to put it out in sections on a blog. And I was waiting for the book to come out. I've been waiting for a while for the book to come out, actually. So when people have read it, I think, and they'll probably be a little more curious about what I have to say. And the problem is too that unless people read the book or listen to us, they're not really going to be on the same page when they go to the blog. They're really going to be lost. I kind of went, jumped the gun and put some stuff out there a little bit earlier that I shouldn't probably have put out just because it didn't make any sense if you hadn't read the book. Like the meaning of Palestine and the Arabic letter Nun.
Oh yeah, I read that. I actually read that before I had a chance to finish reading the book. I was in the process of reading the book, and there wasn't, at least for me, there really wasn't anything in there that I found too confusing or that I just couldn't reconcile or anything. It was pretty, to me anyway, it was pretty straightforward. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one.
Yeah, the stuff that Kubrick does is absolutely steeped in mythology, but not just for the fun of it, or just because he liked mythology, but because he understood, he could see in the way that the neo-alchemists see. And if you want to know why he was such a well-respected director, I mean, other directors, everybody worshipped him, even though he was a very he didn't seem to have a lot of charisma in public. He didn't appear in public hardly at all. In fact, he accepted some award, and he just did a strange video where he talked about Prometheus, and everybody thought that was great. That was great, Stanley. It's because he is high up. He understands, or the people that are part of that high echelon of knowledge, right, who worship the Nakash, see his art. And the ultimate art is constructing reality that is willed by the Nakash. And that's, I'm not trying to be profound, but that's what the Nakash is trying to do, make his alternate world for mankind. And movies are the pinnacle of this power of controlling men, taking them into another place of your own design. And if you're doing it with the influence of the Nakash, or the understanding that he gives, the knowledge that he gives, it's that much more powerful. And and I'm going to just throw it out there. That's Hermetic thought. That is Hermeticism. That's a quintessential Hermetic type of art form, movie making. And Stanley Kubrick was a wizard in every sense of the word. He was an alchemist. So I really did go off on that.
Oh, that's fine. This show, if this show wasn't called The Sharpening, it would be called The Tangent, because anybody
I like
that
that.
has yeah, anyone that has been listening or
Yeah.
watching this show with me as a host, it's just tangents. That's all it is. So I love having on guests that are kind of like me with that and don't mind going off on a tangent or two.
Wow. So yeah, so I got to Attis, and I don't know. I don't really have too much more. I could go on, but I don't think it would be very good, because I haven't really thought about it too much. But from here on out, it will get easier. I think
Yeah.
I might backtrack from time to time, but I think the coming ideas, the coming chapters are so much more fascinating than what I've talked about already.
Well, I
Yes.
think that,
You
yeah,
know, and I'm speaking for myself, of course.
well, of course,
Hopefully, other
yeah.
people think they are as fascinating as I. We'll see.
Well, I know from where I'm sitting, this has already been fascinating, and this part of the book that we've covered in this part of the show, I've read 2 or 3 times now, and I still find it so it's fascinating, and it is one of those things that reading it and hearing about it is it's like different perspectives. I've read the information, but hearing the information directly, it causes it to sink in more. And I love that, and that's why I'm so excited about this series, because the whole book, is going to be like that, and even just from what we've covered in this part, as foundational as it is, I mean, I'm not bored by it. I don't think there are too many that are experiencing the show at home that would be bored by this. But I will say with the book, I don't consider this boring. But if I if there's really no good way to say it. It's just like if it just gets more and more exciting. Let's say that as you progress throughout the book, as exciting as this is, it is the foundational part of it, and it just gets deeper and deeper and more exciting as the book goes on. And I think why I can identify with that so much is because I write like that too. So.
Well, you know, speaking of the internet age or the information age and having all the information out on the internet, now I couldn't have written this book unless I had like a modern computer with I don't want to promote any specific program, but the type of program where you can lay out a whole book, whatever, 300 pages or so, and have the chapters in front of you. You can see them all, and then you can adjust correctly so you can get people to understand where you're going. When you're doing research, you throw a lot of things just sort of out, maybe on the canvas, and you really need to arrange it in a fashion that people can digest. And I couldn't imagine doing that on a typewriter. I mean, I
Oh
grew up in the
yeah,
age
same here. Yeah.
where I used to have to compose either, on the typewriter or write things out and then transfer it all. I had a manual typewriter, and that's what I did. That was back in the early 80s.
Wow.
When I started going to my secondary education. And I had to get out of the habit of using the Hermetic terms for education. I'm just not going to do it. I'm trying not to do it. But yeah, on my website, I say something like that. It probably comes off sort of as this guy's really weird or very. I don't know.
If you ever think people think that about you, go and read some of my blogs, and that'll make you feel
No,
better.
that's, yeah, no, being weird isn't something that I haven't heard ever. I guess it's my thing. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna not get weird or not become weird. I guess it's just something that you are or not.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of really interesting things that are on the horizon, and I'm excited about your work, and I'm really excited about where this show is going, this series. If this first episode is any indication of what the next are going to be, since I said I mentioned for the viewers I pre-record, so I don't, right now I don't know how they're going to go. But if this is any indication, it's just going to be better and better and better. So I'm really excited about what you have to offer us, Mark.
Oh, thanks a lot, Josh. Yeah, me too. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to come on this public type forum and talk about the book, because I think someone said it very well, that hearing it from sort of a different perspective, just hearing the person or a person talk about what you're reading really helps to kind of coalesce the ideas in your mind, and hopefully that will do that for people, and I think this will be really, really good, and I'm looking forward to completing the series with you as well. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that it's done that for me. So, even just from me speaking, it's done that for me. So that's really great. Yeah, I'm super excited about this series. I'm glad that not only that you agreed to do it, but that you and I are actually working together on this as like a project, which is it's really
Hmm.
awesome because I've never had that experience doing something like that with a guest before, and I wish I could more. I wish I could more often. This is going very, very well. And from the first time that we spoke on the phone, I figured that it probably would, because it seems like you and I have a lot in common, especially in the ways that we think and come to our conclusions and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think we do. Yeah, and I got to thank you for reading the book.
Uh, yeah, I
Thanks
thank
for
you for
reading it.
sending it.
My
Yeah,
pleasure.
thank you
Thanks for
for
sending your
sending
book.
it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely, definitely. I guess I should thank you for reading my book as well.
It's my pleasure.
To be honest, that actually kind of came as a surprise. I didn't know if you already even had time to read it. I figured, with you as busy as you've been and getting your book out, I didn't think that you would have had an opportunity yet. But yeah, the first time that we talked, you were talking about the last chapter and everything. I was like, oh, you already read it? And you're like, yeah. Like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it was. I enjoyed it very much. So
Good
yeah, thanks for
deal.
that too.
Yeah, absolutely, anytime. And well, I guess we should just wrap up this this episode then. We've we've covered everything we're gonna cover here, and for the people either listening or viewing this episode, I highly encourage you to come back next week, because if you enjoyed this even a little bit, you're gonna definitely enjoy the weeks to come, because Mark's book, it just gets more and more exciting. And like I said, like I was trying to say eloquently earlier and failed miserably at it, I don't consider any portion of the book boring or uninteresting at all. But it is a book that when you first start out, it does get more and more interesting as you progress. So that's what we're trying to do with this series. Um, and so yeah, you'll have to for those listening and watching, as I ramble on and try to figure out how to end the show, you'll have to continue next week, where we will be back with Mark Flynn, author of Secrets of Forbidden Secrets of the Labyrinth. Let me find the subtitle there. The Awakened Ones, The Hidden Destiny of America, and The Day After Tomorrow. I guess I should ask you once again, I think we talked about it at the top of the show, but Where can people who want to find more about you or order your book, where can they do that?
First, they can go to my website, markaflynn.com, and then I have links for ordering the book on Tom Horn's site, Raiders News Update, and Amazon.com. Or you can go to Watch Your Vault. I definitely shouldn't leave that out, Watch Your Vault. Or first go to Watch Your Vault, and we're all linked back and forth, so you'll find the book anywhere there.
Fantastic. And at the time of this recording, I'm going to have, or it'll be future from the time of this recording, but when this recording is uploaded, I'm going to put a special section on my website as well for this series. So if you go to www.ministudyministry.com, and that'll bring you to the home page. Click on the link that says the Sharpening, and look on there. There's going to be there'll be a section for just this series, and I'll have a link to the book as well. So lots of places for people to find the book.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, this has been a blast. I'm excited for the next one. I'm excited for the series, and I'm really excited that that you're getting out there and you're writing and doing this show. Of course, I'm excited about that. There's just so much important information in what you've presented in your book. I'm just thrilled that you're coming on to talk about it and to do this series. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this and for putting so much work and effort into this as well. I really appreciate
you as well.
it.
I mean, you've put a lot of work and effort into it, and I really appreciate it very much. So can't say it enough.
Yeah, same here.
Okay.
Same here. All right. Well, again, tune in next week. We will have Mark Flynn back on, and we will get even deeper into the labyrinth. All that being said, you have been listening or viewing The Sharpening. I am your host, Josh Peck, and as always, take care and God bless.